The village of Alara lay nestled in the shadow of a vast forest, its canopy thick with ancient trees that whispered in the wind. For generations, the villagers lived in harmony with the land, their lives guided by traditions passed down from the ancestors. It was a place of simple joys and close-knit families, where love and community thrived. Among its residents were Nkem and Adana, a young couple whose love was the envy of the village. Nkem was a hunter, strong and determined, while Adana, a skilled weaver, was known for her beauty and kindness. They were inseparable, their laughter echoing in the fields as they worked side by side. But beneath their happiness lay a simmering fear. Adana's family disapproved of Nkem, considering him unworthy of their daughter. The tension grew with each passing day, and whispers of a forced separation began to reach Nkem's ears. One moonlit night, Nkem and Adana met in the clearing near the forest's edge, their usual sanctuary from the prying eyes of the village. Nkem's face was tight with worry as he spoke. "They will tear us apart, Adana. I can feel it. Your father has already spoken to the elders." Adana clasped his hands, her voice trembling. "I will not let them. I love you, Nkem. No one can take that from us." As they held each other, the wind rustled the trees, carrying with it a strange sound, a low, mournful hum. Nkem's gaze shifted to the forest, a shiver running down his spine. "There's a way," he said suddenly, his voice resolute. "A way to protect our love, no matter what." Adana frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's an old story," Nkem began, his tone hushed, "about the spirit in the forest. It's said that it grants wishes to those brave enough to ask. If we make a pact, Adana, nothing will come between us." The next evening, under the cover of darkness, Nkem and Adana ventured into the forest. The air grew colder as they walked, the trees towering like silent sentinels. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became, as if the creatures of the night dared not disturb the path they tread. "Are you sure about this, Nkem?" Adana whispered, her grip on his arm tightening. Nkem nodded, though his own heart hammered in his chest. "If it means we can stay together, it's worth it." They came to a clearing bathed in eerie silverlight. At its center stood a stone altar, weathered with age and covered in strange carvings. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Adana hesitated. "This place feels wrong." "It's our only chance," Nkem said firmly. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We call upon the spirit of this forest. Hear us and grant our wish." The wind picked up suddenly, swirling around them like a living thing. The shadows deepened, and a voice, low and resonant, echoed through the clearing. "Who dares disturb my rest?" The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating in their very bones. Nkem and Adana clung to each other as the shadows in the clearing twisted and coalesced, forming a figure shrouded in darkness. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its presence was suffocating. "You wish to make a pact," the spirit said, its voice a mix of curiosity and malice. "But every wish has a price." Nkem stepped forward, his fear replaced by determination. "We want to protect our love. Let no one come between us, no matter the cost." The spirit's laughter sent chills down their spines. "No matter the cost?" How bold. It turned its gaze to Adana, who trembled under its scrutiny. "Do you share his resolve, child?" Adana hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. But when she looked at Nkem, her love for him burned brighter than her fear. "Yes," she said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes." The spirit extended a shadowy hand toward them. "Then seal your vow in blood. Let it bind you together for eternity." The spirit produced a ceremonial dagger, its blade glinting unnaturally in the moonlight. "Each of you must make your mark," it said. "Your blood will unite you and fulfill your wish." Nkem took the dagger first, wincing as he sliced his palm. The blood dripped onto the altar, the carvings glowing faintly in response. Adana followed, her hand trembling as she mirrored his action. When their blood mingled on the stone, the spirit's laughter echoed through the clearing. The pact is sealed, it said, its form dissipating into the air. But remember, mortals, all power comes at a cost. Your love is protected, but so, too, are you bound to me. Before they could question the meaning of its words, the forest returned to its usual stillness. The clearing seemed unchanged, the eerie glow of the carvings gone. Nkem and Adana exchanged a glance, their relief overshadowing their unease. "We did it," Nkem said, pulling her into his arms. "No one can tear us apart now." The days that followed were filled with a strange, almost surreal peace. Nkem and Adana's families, who had once been at odds, suddenly seemed to accept their union. The elders, once staunchly opposed, offered their blessings without hesitation. Even the villagers, who had whispered their doubts, began to celebrate the couple's love. But alongside this newfound harmony came peculiar occurrences. Animals avoided Nkem and Adana's presence, retreating at the sight of them. Plants wilted when touched by their hands, and the air around them seemed colder, even on the warmest days. One night, as they lay together in their hut, Adana woke with a start. A faint whisper echoed in her ears, a voice she recognized all too well. "Bound by blood," it said, "and by blood shall you remain." Adana shook Nkem awake, her heart pounding. "Something's wrong," she said. "The spirit, I heard it." Nkem frowned but tried to reassure her. "It's just your mind playing tricks," he said. "The pact worked, Adana. Nothing can harm us now." But deep down, he felt it too, a growing darkness that they could not escape. The peace in Alara was shattered the next morning. A villager discovered a lifeless goat near the forest's edge, its body drained of blood. The elders dismissed it as the work of a wild animal, but whispers of something more sinister began to circulate. Nkem and Adana tried to ignore the unease spreading through the village, but the signs became harder to dismiss. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally toward them, and their reflections in the river appeared distorted, their eyes darker than they should have been. One evening, as they returned from a visit to Adana's family, they found their hut in disarray. The walls were scratched, and the air inside was cold and damp. In the center of the room lay the ceremonial dagger, its blade gleaming as if freshly polished. "How did this get here?" Adana whispered, her voice shaking. Nkem picked up the dagger, his grip tightening. "The spirit is testing us," he said. "We won't let it win." But the dagger's weight felt heavier than it should, and Nkem couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As the weeks passed, the darkness surrounding Nkem and Adana grew bolder. Villagers reported hearing strange cries at night, and a heavy fog began to settle over the village, refusing to lift even under the midday sun. Crops failed, and livestock became sickly, their eyes clouded with an unnatural glaze. The villagers began to distance themselves from Nkem and Adana, their fear outweighing their affection. "It's them," one woman whispered. "They've brought this upon us." Adana overheard the murmurs, her heart breaking. "They're turning on us, Nkem," she said. "What if the spirit's power is doing this?" "We'll fix it," Nkem said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll go back to the forest and demand answers." But that night, the spirit appeared to them once more, its voice rumbling like thunder. "You made a pact," it said, its glowing eyes piercing the darkness. "There is no escape. Your love will remain, but the village will pay the price." The spirit's words hung heavy in the air, its presence suffocating. Adana clung to Nkem, her body trembling. "This wasn't what we wanted," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "We only wanted to protect our love." The spirit laughed, a sound that sent chills through them both. "You did protect it," it said. "But love, like all things, requires balance. You bound yourselves to me, and now the scales must tip." Nkem stepped forward, his fear replaced by anger. "We didn't agree to this. You tricked us." The spirit's form twisted, its glowing eyes narrowing. "I gave you exactly what you asked for," it hissed. "You said no one could come between you, and now no one will. But such devotion comes at a price the village will continue to pay." Before they could respond, The spirit dissolved into the air, leaving behind a bitter cold that seemed to seep into their bones. By morning, the village of Alara was in chaos. Another animal had been found dead, its lifeless body lying at the center of the village square. The fog thickened, and the villagers grew restless, their fear turning into anger. "It's Nkem and Adana," one elder declared during a hastily convened meeting. "Since their union, the village has been cursed." Others murmured in agreement, their faces hard with suspicion. "They need to leave," someone said, "before more harm comes to us." Adana and Nkem, hearing the rising outcry from their hut, felt their hearts sink. "They're blaming us," Adana said, tears streaming down her face. "What are we going to do?" "We'll leave if we must," Nkem said, though his voice wavered. "But first, we'll go back to the forest. We'll find the spirit and end this once and for all." Under the cover of darkness, Nkem and Adana slipped away from the village, their steps hurried and silent. The forest loomed ahead, its thick canopy blocking out the moonlight. As they entered, the air grew colder, and the wind whispered through the trees like a warning. The clearing was just as they remembered it, though the stone altar now seemed darker, more menacing. The carvings on its surface glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. "Spirit," Nkem called, his voice echoing in the stillness. "We demand answers. Show yourself." The wind picked up, swirling around them. Shadows twisted and danced, and the spirit materialized once more, its form larger and more imposing than before. "You return so soon," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "What is it you seek?" "We want to end the pact," Adana said, her voice firm despite her fear. "You've taken enough. Release us." The spirit's laughter echoed through the clearing. "And the pact? You cannot undo what has been sealed in blood. Your love is bound to me, and so is your fate." "There must be a way," Nkem said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Tell us what we have to do." The spirit seemed to consider this, its form shifting like smoke in the wind. "There is a way," it said at last, "but it will not come without sacrifice." Adana stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "What kind of sacrifice?" The spirit's glowing eyes fixed on her. "Your bond is unbreakable, but the balance can be restored. If one of you willingly surrenders your soul to me, the curse on the village will be lifted." Nkem's stomach churned. "There has to be another way." "There is not," the spirit replied. "Choose, or the village will continue to suffer." The couple stood in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. The spirit's laughter echoed once more. "You have until the next full moon. If no choice is made, the village will fall." When Nkem and Adana returned to the village, their faces pale and their steps unsteady, they found the villagers waiting for them. The elders stood at the forefront, their expressions grim. "You've returned," one elder said. "Did you speak to the spirit?" "Yes," Nkem replied, his voice hollow. "It said the curse will end if one of us gives up our soul." The villagers murmured, their fear mingling with anger. "Then one of you must do it," a man said. "It's the only way." Adana's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. This pact was supposed to protect us, not hurt anyone." An elder stepped forward, his gaze hard. "Whatever your intentions, the fact remains. Your actions have brought this upon us. If you will not end it, we will." The threat hung heavy in the air, and Nkem pulled Adana close. "We need time," he said. "Please give us time." The elders conferred briefly before nodding. "You have until the full moon," one said. "If the curse isn't lifted by then, we will act." In the days that followed, the villagers' hostility grew. Nkem and Adana were shunned, their once close friends refusing to speak to them. Children whispered and pointed as they passed, and their families turned them away. Adana sat in their hut one evening, her heart heavy. "We're losing everything, Nkem," she said. "The village hates us, and the spirit won't stop until we make a choice." Nkem paced the room, his frustration boiling over. "I won't let it take you," he said fiercely. "If anyone surrenders their soul, It will be me. No, Adana cried, grabbing his arm. We made this choice together, and we'll face it together. There has to be another way. But as the full moon approached, the weight of the spirit's ultimatum loomed larger, threatening to tear them apart. The spirit's words hung heavy in the air, its presence suffocating. As the full moon approached, the air in Alara grew colder, the villagers more restless. Nkem and Adana knew they were running out of time. Desperation led them to seek out the village seer, an elderly woman named Mama Ife, known for her deep connection to the ancestors. Her hut, tucked away at the edge of the village, was filled with the scent of burning herbs and adorned with symbols of protection. Mama Ife greeted them with a knowing look, her milky white eyes seemingly piercing through their souls. "You come seeking wisdom from those who walked before us," she said, her voice a blend of age and power. "But the ancestors do not easily intervene." "Please, Mama Ife," Adana pleaded. "We've made a terrible mistake. The spirit demands one of our souls to end the curse." Mama Ife closed her eyes, swaying slightly as she muttered an incantation. The room grew silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Then she spoke. "The ancestors say the spirit feeds on your bond. The strength of your love sustains it. To weaken the spirit, you must confront the very foundation of your pact." "What does that mean?" Nkem asked, his voice trembling. "You must return to the place where the pact was made," Mama Ife replied. "And there, you must choose whether to honor it or sever it completely. But beware, the choice will test the limits of your hearts." With Mama Ife's cryptic guidance, Nkem and Adana prepared to return to the forest. The villagers, now more hostile than ever, watched them with suspicion as they passed through the square. Whispers followed them like a shadow. "They'll bring more ruin," someone muttered. "Better if they never return," another added. The couple ignored the taunts, their focus on the task ahead. The forest loomed before them, its trees swaying as if alive. The clearing where they had sealed their pact felt different this time, darker, colder, and more foreboding. As they reached the stone altar, the carvings began to glow, and the air thickened. The spirit materialized, its form larger and more menacing than ever. "You return to me," it said, its voice a rumble that shook the ground. "Have you come to fulfill your end of the bargain?" "We've come to end this," Nkem said, his voice steady despite his fear. "The curse on the village must be lifted." The spirit laughed, a sound that made their skin crawl. "The village was never part of our agreement. Your bond fuels my power. Sever it, and the curse will fade, but so will your love." The spirit's words struck like a blow. Nkem and Adana exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy. "You're lying," Adana said. "You want us to give up what we've fought for." The spirit's glowing eyes narrowed. "Your bond was forged in blood," it said. "To undo it would be to undo your very connection. Do you love each other enough to make such a sacrifice?" Nkem clenched his fists, his mind racing. "There has to be another way." "There is none," the spirit replied, its voice low and dangerous. "You chose this path, and now you must walk it to its end." The altar began to pulse, the carvings glowing brighter. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing thicker. The spirit raised a clawed hand. "Decide, mortals. Do you break the bond and save your village, or do you cling to your love and watch them perish?" Adana stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "If breaking the bond saves the village, then we'll do it." Nkem grabbed her arm, his voice filled with anguish.
"No."
"Adana, don't. There must be another way." Tears filled her eyes as she turned to him. "Nkem, we caused this. We can't let the village suffer for our mistake." The spirit's laughter echoed through the clearing. "How noble," it said mockingly. "But words alone will not suffice. To break the bond, you must each give up something precious." "What do you mean?" Nkem asked. The spirit gestured to the altar. "Place your hands upon the stone. If your love is true, the bond will shatter. But beware, your hearts may never feel the same again." Nkem and Adana approached the altar, their hands trembling. The carvings glowed brighter as they placed their palms on the cold stone. The moment they did, a searing pain shot through them, and the spirit's voice boomed. "Feel the weight of your choice," it roared. "Your love, once unbreakable, will become a shadow of what it was." Images flooded their minds, memories of their laughter, their shared dreams, their happiest moments together. As the pain intensified, those images began to fade, replaced by a cold emptiness. "No," Nkem cried, tears streaming down his face. "I can't lose this." Adana sobbed, her voice barely audible. "We have to let go." With a final surge of energy, the altar cracked, and the carvings went dark. The spirit let out a deafening scream as its form dissolved into the air. The clearing fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. When Nkem and Adana turned to each other, something had changed. The warmth in their eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. They were strangers now, bound by a shared pain but no longer by love. The village, however, began to heal. The fog lifted, the crops flourished, and the animals returned. The villagers welcomed Nkem and Adana back with gratitude, but the couple felt no joy in their return. As they walked through the village square, the once inseparable lovers now seemed worlds apart. The bond that had defined them was broken, and though the curse was lifted, the cost was etched into their souls forever. Back in the village, Nkem and Adana tried to resume their lives, but everything felt different. The small hut they had once shared, filled with laughter and warmth, now seemed cold and empty. They went about their daily routines in silence, avoiding each other's eyes. Adana sat by the fire one evening, her fingers mechanically weaving a basket. Her movements were precise, but devoid of the passion she once had. Nkem watched her from the corner of the room, his heart heavy. He wanted to speak, to tell her that he still cared, but the words caught in his throat. "We saved the village," Adana said finally, her voice flat. Nkem nodded. "We did." But deep down, both of them knew that saving the village had cost them the most precious part of themselves, the bond that had once made them whole. The village of Alara began to thrive again. With the curse lifted, crops grew bountifully, and the animals returned to their herds. The villagers celebrated their renewed fortune with gratitude, but they also remained wary of Nkem and Adana. "They gave up their love to save us," one elder remarked. "But such a bond, once broken, leaves scars." The villagers treated the couple with respect but kept their distance, as though they were afraid of what lingered beneath the surface. Nkem and Adana, once the heartbeat of the community, now seemed like ghosts walking among the living. Mama Ife visited them one afternoon, her expression kind but somber. "The ancestors speak of your sacrifice," she said. "They honor your choice, but they also warn of the dangers of leaving wounds untended." "What do you mean?" Adana asked. "The bond may be broken, but the shadows of your pact still linger," Mama Ife replied. "You must find a way to heal, or the pain will consume you both." Though the spirit had been banished, its influence left faint traces in the village. Strange occurrences continued to plague Nkem and Adana. At night, they both dreamed of the forest, the glowing altar, the spirit's voice, and the searing pain of breaking the bond. One night, Adana woke to find the ceremonial dagger lying at the foot of their bed. She gasped, her heart racing as she picked it up. The blade was cold, and the carvings on the hilt seemed to glow faintly. "Nkem," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Look." He stared at the dagger, his face pale. "It's a warning," he said. "The spirit's power may be gone, but its shadow remains." They decided to bury the dagger deep in the forest, hoping to rid themselves of its presence. But as they dug the hole beneath the ancient trees, the wind whispered around them, carrying faint echoes of laughter. The spirit was gone, but its mark on their lives was indelible. Despite the tension between them, Nkem and Adana began to find small ways to bridge the gap. Nkem brought home fresh game from his hunts, leaving it on the table without a word. Adana cooked the meat, seasoning it with herbs she had once gathered with him in the forest. Their interactions were cautious, tentative. A shared glance here, a quiet gesture there. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Adana broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever feel the same again?" Nkem stared into the flames. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I want to try." For the first time in weeks, Adana smiled faintly. It wasn't the warmth of their old love, but it was a spark, a fragile ember that might one day grow. On the next full moon, the villagers gathered beneath the sacred baobab tree to thank the ancestors for their renewed prosperity. Nkem and Adana stood at the edge of the crowd, hesitant to join the celebration. But Mama Ife approached them, her staff tapping lightly against the ground. "The ancestors have seen your pain," she said, "and they offer you a gift." She led them to the base of the tree, where a young sapling grew beside its ancient roots. "This tree symbolizes renewal," Mama Ife explained. "It grows from the soil of your sacrifice. Tend to it, and it will remind you that even broken bonds can give life to something new." Nkem and Adana knelt beside the sapling, their hands brushing its delicate leaves. For the first time since their pact was broken, they felt a faint sense of hope. The seasons passed, and the sapling grew strong under Nkem and Adana's care. Though their love would never return to what it had been, they found comfort in their shared purpose. Together, they worked to rebuild not only their lives, but also their connection. The villagers, seeing their quiet resilience, began to embrace them once more. Nkem and Adana became symbols of sacrifice and perseverance, their story told as a cautionary tale and a lesson in redemption.